Catus, Maximus here, this time with a review of the Harbor Freight Icon, partial offset, ratcheting, flex, reversible, extra long handle, double box end wrenches. And yep, these are the same as apparently the Mountains, the Easy Reds, the Matcos. They are apparently all made by a large Taiwanese contract tool manufacturer, which also sells tools under their own names, called Kabo. Kabo. And so what happened is Easy Red and Matco, these came out about 2015, and they were exclusives to those brands. And then in the last couple of years, that contract has been released, and so these have been coming out under various other manufacturers. Obviously, these are super duper long. A quick criticism, and it appears every set that I've seen, whether it's by Easy Red or Matco or Mountain or the Icon, none of them have the 8 or 11 millimeter. It's really kind of annoying. So somewhere out there is that size, but I don't know why they're limiting them to 5 wrenches. Also, everywhere you see, these things are expensive. Harbor Freight's normal price is $150 on these wrenches, just straight up $30 a piece. Even the Mountain ones on Amazon are like $130 or $135. So, and the Matcos are like $300. Another quick thing about these is people do break them. These will break. There is no question that, you know, when this 19 by 17 millimeter wrench is 18 inches overall length from end to end outside of the boxes. From the center of the box, it's about 17 inches. And when you put a 1.5 foot long handle on a little ratcheting box wrench mechanism, you will break it if you're trying to go, you know, if you have heavy duty, hardened or rusted and just totally jammed suspension bolts, that type of stuff. You know, you wouldn't expect a ratcheting box wrench with all these cutouts and these thin walls and the thin little pins to actually take, you know, hundreds of foot-pounds of torque. And among all the brands, that's what a lot of the reviews are reflecting, is simply the fact that some people really have good luck with them. Some people do end up breaking them. And that's why you would actually, if you're going to get these, you want to get them from Matco or Harbor Freight even. The reason is because these are going to be used in a situation where you just don't have the reach. You're going to have to remove other components. It's going to be, you know, replacing starters, transmissions, that type of stuff. Where you're going to end up using these guys, and eventually you're going to be on some really stuck fastener, and, you know, you're going to end up causing them to fail. Either the buckle will, you know, the gear or the ratchet mechanism will strip, the buckle will break, something like that. So you want to kind of baby them. Otherwise, I think they're a real interesting design. They use a spline drive. I'm not so fond of spline drive. They are metric, even though they do advertise that spline can work on fractional fasteners. They're all cut to metric. And they're really loose fitting, and they're really not recommended because you'll just end up stripping out a lot of bolts. And what I'm happy about, and I did get these as a gift, I didn't actually buy these, so I'm being so critical. These come in a huge box. One thing that's nice is that they've stopped advertising, you know, turn all these fasteners with spline and that type of stuff. It's more conservative advertising. Of course, with the Icon, it does come with the toolbox tray and all that with the set. And you get an Icon, so if you break them, at least there's 1,000 Harbor Freight stores. You can just walk in there and, you know, get it replaced. So they use spline drive on these just because they are meant for getting into really high, tough to get to places, and they're reversing, so you can use the backside where it's flush. But this little offset is the big deal. That's what sets these double box end wrenches apart from pretty much all the others. The Tectons, there's just so many brands of these things. But this just provides you a little bit of extra reach. You know, if the fastener, there we go. If the fastener is just slightly recessed, it just allows you to get just a little bit of extra reach. So it kind of acts like being an offset, although a true offset would be the head would be actually bent downwards. So this is like a partial offset. It kind of acts like having a super short well socket. And so that's really the deal with all these ratcheting double box hand wrenches. Every brand, you know, there's comments about them breaking and locking up. So if you're going to get those and they're only going to have so much torque, I think spline drive is okay, because the issues with spline drive are made up by the fact that it is open. It is going to be easier to reach into some place and actually get these onto the fastener. The heads have a reasonable amount of resistance on them, so, you know, all flexes, if you're not careful, will push away, but these should have enough to where you can actually manage it onto the fastener. And the ratchet mechanism is a little bit interesting because it's attached. So as you're ratcheting, you can see that the button actually moves as the pawl is moving back and forth. It seems to be okay. I think the fit and the finish could be a little bit better. But overall, they're really not too bad. It's just missing that 9-11 millimeters, just a little bit annoying. Some things like on the smaller sizes, it kind of becomes apparent that the walls are actually pretty thick on these little offsets, but it is still thinner nonetheless than the whole thickness of the ratcheting box end. So that does also further increase the fasteners that you can access with one of these. And part of the other reason it's so thick is because there's a little lip, and so they push it in through this side, and so it's held from going out through this lip, and then the pawl itself is what is preventing it from falling apart. And interesting, they don't use screws, they use press fit pins, and in this case I can understand because the threads of a screw are stress risers, so when everything's so small like this, I totally understand them using the little solid pins. So overall, these things are expensive from Harbor Freight, but it turns out that they're just expensive everywhere, and I'm actually surprised that Harbor Freight ended up with these wrenches. And indeed, these are coming out of the same factory as the Matcos and the Easy Reds. One thing else mentioned, and a lot of other people have on these, like this 10 by 8, you can just see there, it has a bit of twist in it. I'm not going to give them too much harshness, you know. I thought, you know, I have a gift receipt, I could go swap these out and complain about that, but like this 8 by 10, this wrench is over 12 inches long. It's a foot long, super thin beam. Forging this thing out and heat treating it and making sure it's absolutely straight is something that's is pretty difficult, and I'm pretty sure that it adds to the expense of these overall. Also, they're basically the amount of times that they're having to replace these. I think that because it seems nonsensical that these are just so expensive, no matter what brand, they're all well over $100. And I think it's just the fact that they know that there's going to be an increase now of warranty claims on these, just as a nature when you put just a ridiculous breaker bar length handle on a ratcheting box wrench. That they're basically charging a bunch just to be able to make any money off of these, because they know that they're going to average, if you're using these professionally, then you'd probably break at least one a year, probably a couple or even more. And so they basically have to run that into the price, is the fact that they're just going to have to be replacing these pretty often. So that's one advantage of getting the icons, is you can just walk into a Harbor Freight. It's about the next best thing to a tool truck, which would be the reason you might buy a Matco's, because when they break, you just call the Matco truck and get a replacement. And so one of the big advantages to these is that head. I mean, even on this 19 millimeter, you're talking about a head that's a little less than an inch tall overall, and that little offset, like a situation where you have a bunch of fasteners and you want to clear one, obviously that would just be impossible. You just wouldn't be able to, because the box wrench is just too big. It would hit the other fastener. So this little offset really is the whole purpose of buying these particular ones, because then you can get around to the fastener just like so and be able to actually work on it and clear another fastener that's right next to it. Really is a pretty big deal. I'm really surprised, and with how long this handle is, I can't even feel the resistance. So that's kind of the problem, is these handles are so big, you won't even be feeling like you're putting a ton of torque on it, and then, it will give way. So overall, a lot of the people find these pretty handy, and just there are probably a little bit more stories of these breaking than many other wrenches, just because they are so go-to, because you can just grab one of these, you've got just a ton of leverage, and they pretty much will work on any type of fastener. And as far as sizing of these things go, some people complained that they didn't like how it was like 8, 10, 12, 14, 13, 15, 16, 18. Those are really more match sizes for the types of vehicles that you're working on. If you're working on Japanese and Korean vehicles, which by the way is like 3/4 of all the cars sold on Earth, an 810, a 12, 14, and a 17, 19, you can pretty much take apart any Toyota. I mean, down to every last piece. Every Toyota, Hyundai, Kia, Suzuki, Nissan. I mean, really. And so that's why they do it, because when you're working on a lot of vehicles, it's going to be 12 and 14, or it's going to be 17 and 19. So that's why they do it instead of just being consecutive ordering, is because really studies and efficiency basically say so. although your personal preference may vary. As far as fitment and tightness, I will say that being metric, they do fit very tight. I mean, here's a 12 millimeter and it actually stays in there not too bad. And you know it has to be a tight fit, otherwise it would just fall out just immediately if it wasn't decent. So these are really tightly sized, so I do appreciate that. Same thing on the 14 millimeter side. And as far a real quick note about spline drives is, so we have a 14 millimeter, it's nice and tight. Many times they'll be like, oh, spline drive will work on fractional. So that would be the 9/16 is what you would think the 14, but it doesn't, because the 9/16 is just slightly larger than 14. So you end up in this situation where you have to use the 15 millimeter. And I mean, obviously, this is just catching on the very end of that bolt. I mean, this bolt, it's ridiculous. And so you end up stripping out fasteners. And I am, once again, glad that they're pulling away from advertising that spline drives will really work on both fractional and metric fasteners. The nice thing about 9/16, however, is it does, of course, work on the 9/16. But then 9/16 also happens to work on a 14 millimeter much better, because it happens to be just slightly oversized by a fraction of a millimeter. Just as a quick example. So don't be confused, and don't use these on like 4-point fasteners and that type of stuff. So besides that, I think for the usefulness and the utilitarianism of these, they could be recommended. Really, you don't have to get the icons. I would just recommend not getting like the Amazon only Mountain brand or something like that. Actually, Mountain isn't Amazon only, but brands like that, it's going to be hard to get a warranty. And these are the type of wrench where they will can save you a bunch of time and hassle and frustration. But also be aware that if you're breaking bolts with them, that they are ratcheting box wrenches, and with super long handles, and you're inevitably going to break them. You know, they'll break a lot of bolts, and then some bolts will break them, and then you will just want to have an easier time of being able to swap them out. And so that's why you would go with like an Icon, is just so you can just drive down to the store and swap one out and be back to work, you know, an hour later. So there you have it. These are the Kabo Easy Red Matco Icon super duper long handle double box wrench semi offset flex reversibles. They are a pretty interesting design. You know, if you're, you know, they could pretty much eliminate the need for any kind of fan belt tools and special tensioner wrench tools, just because they're so long and thin. And on interior work or working inside doors and that type of stuff, a variety of service and mechanic industries, I'm sure that these could save people quite a bit of time and frustration. Which got me thinking about these. There will be those situations, you know, there are things called crow's feet. I'm going to break one out. Which is like a wrench designed to go on like a socket, so you can use an extension with it, and it's, you know, it's a crow's foot wrench. So in situations where you use crow's feet, these are kind of interesting, because once you break a fastener, you can actually flip that head up one way, and having the other box wrench gives you just a bit of a handle to get some torque on, not for just pulling it, but once you get it loose, or if you're in a situation where you've got the fastener loose but you need to go straight on, you can do that. You get a super long reach, and then you can use it as a basically like a ratcheting crow's foot, which of course makes me think that's a tool I haven't seen yet, is ratcheting box head crow's feet. I'm sure we'll see them soon, and they'll probably charge $500,000 for them. So anyway, sorry for the long review and too much talking, but I really think these things are interesting. They're kind of a little bit playing with fire, but can't wait for them to help save me. It always seems it's like adjusting power steering tension, belt tension and stuff is where you really need odd wrenches like this. But even these still won't allow you to replace an oil pan on a 300ZX without pulling the engine. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.